I have another question. I want to bring it back a little bit to something you alluded to earlier, James, about the relationship or unhealthy relationship between ideology and faith. And Gabe, I'd like to actually get your perspective weighing in on this too. So, one of the things that Ray and I have talked a lot about is this question in the Christian context, what Ray's been calling the theology of public engagement, right? And specifically, what is the right relationship to politics that Christians should have, right? And are there any kind of theological or biblical precedent for outlining the right relationship to politics or the degree to which faith and theological concerns can become intertwined with political and ideological issues, right? And so obviously now there's a big question on like Christian nationalism and the relationship between church and state, and was America a Christian nation? And these are some of the debates that are being had in certain circles, right? As Christians, how much should we care about our faith versus how much should we be advocating for some kind of political issue? Like obviously abortion is a big question in a lot of, kind of evangelical sectors in the US. So I'm curious for you, do you think that, and you can reject this binary frame if you don't agree, right? But I'm going to frame it like this to be a little provocative. Do you think a potential solution to just general de-escalation, depolarization, and taking the temperature down is to gently push back on ideological influences encroaching on faith? I think you would even use the word like ideological conflict entrepreneurs, kind of using ideological narratives to kind of wrap itself around faith and faith communities to push some kind of political agenda, perhaps even nefariously. So do you think that should be pushed back against, and there should be kind of a separation of the ideological frame and the theological frame? Or do you think the cat's out of the bag, so to speak? The two have gotten mixed together. This is where we are in America with the culture wars, and we have to find a way to just to live with that and find resilience and better dialogue amidst having a kind of a union between ideology, politics, and religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you asked the easy questions, right? Um, get me on the record. The most important initial response would be to say that the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy does not want to take anybody's faith away. If anything, we are trying to advocate for people having strong convictions in the best of what their faith has to offer to the whole community. Whatever the faith might be that they embrace or don't embrace, what are the aspects of that that are healing over harmful, right? And collectively so. And one of those is to be able to believe in your religious convictions and have your religious identity. That's a big part of who we are, in particularly in the United States, right? Is this idea that we are a pluralist community, which means your faith or other identity markers are protected. Where the problem comes is when your religious conviction excludes that freedom for others. When you have an ideology that is so fundamentalist that part of that is to say the existence of people who disagree with me is incompatible with my being who I want to be religiously, right? So your religious identity is based on eliminating people who disagree with that. That's a problem. And it, for me, theologically, because I can talk about that from the perspective of the divine, and does the divine wish for us to be out there harming others? And some would say, well, God thinks there are bad people and we should kill bad people. I just don't understand why that God that they espouse needs human help killing people. That's a whole different conversation, right? It's a theological debate, and I'm willing and happy to have it. But more importantly, we live in a rule-based, law-based society. That is what the United States is, right? Rule of law. Those laws determined by the society over time and through our court systems, adapted and changed through our representatives and legislators. They shift with time. Sometimes they're not great, and we try to fix them. Sometimes maybe they were good and we broke them, but that's the process. And that's what it means to be American, right? To be a citizen of this country is to be committed to that being the way government and society happen. Now, if you don't like that and you want to break it, there are a couple different ways to go about it. One of them is to overthrow that system somehow. I personally think that human history is overwhelmingly defined by one person or group getting power and telling everybody else what they got to do. That's human history for the most part. Ruled by the people with the messy diversity that that implies and the uncertainty that that suggests and the need to accept things that you don't like is very rare in human history. And if we break it, we will go back to, and we've seen some evidence of this in recent years, one side or the other getting control of everything and forcing everybody else to bend to their will. And we know what that looks like, right? That's authoritarianism in its different flavors, right? And that's just not, quote unquote, our way of life, right? That's not the American experiment, in my opinion. And I've lived in countries like that, lots of them. And, it's just one of the things I love about being American is that that's our reality. We don't have that, sic semper tyrannis. I know that's being used in interesting ways these days as a slogan, but thus always to tyrants was really what the idea was when we formed this space, which is ain't no one person going to force us to be what they want us to be. We get to define that as long as we stay within the parameters of the law, right? And then we get to shape the law. So that's actually, in my mind, really troublesome because it's not happening on the right or the left. It's happening everywhere, right? We'll go back to Gabe used the term tribalism. Everyone's kind of retreating back into their group and saying, it's our way or the highway. And that's not going to work, at least not in a way that sustains a pluralist democracy, right? So one of those things has to change. And I think one of the things that we're not talking enough about, we talk about interfaith dialogue and interfaith conflict. We're not really talking as much about the intrafaith challenges right now. You've got pastors who cannot go to the Christian religious texts right now to encourage people to not use violence. If they get up and say the Beatitudes didn't include, dehumanizing violence as one of the blessed sentiments that are being expressed by Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, they're getting thrown out of their churches. They're losing their jobs because the prophetic voice that encourages spiritual growth and spiritual engagement with the other is getting eclipsed by this absolutism that is wholly exclusive. And that's incompatible with a pluralist democracy. So I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to find those voices in those traditions who are conservative, who are religious, but who are willing to say, our faith actually gives us a way to be all of these things at once and live in community. Can we not like things and be upset about them and try to change laws? Yeah, that's the way it works. Can we criticize others? Yeah, that's okay. But do we have the right, based on our theology, to say, you all cannot belong anymore, and we're going to destroy you if you do, or exclude you if you do? No, you cannot do that. That is not part of what the United States is about. There are other places like that, places that we claim to not like that much, who have, religious authoritarian leaders, and it is a religious authoritarian state. Some in the news these days very prominently. And we claim that that's terrible, but it's because it's not our religion. So if it's ours, it's okay, right? And that's where we're running into problems. And I think I did this thing out at Brigham Young a couple months ago, and the theme of, I guess it was the last one I did a year and a half ago. The theme was, what do you do when religious law refuses to be subject to civil law? When someone's ideology says, I can break the law because God told me I can. Because obviously for religious believers, it is natural that religious law is the most important thing. But for a citizen, it's the civil law that's the most important thing. And those religious identities and religious laws have got to be subject to the civil law if you consider yourself a citizen, right? And so that's a real paradox. It's a real challenge because, again, as ICRD, we're not going to go tell someone their faith is not okay. We don't believe in that. We actually are proponents of well-lived spirituality as part of who we are as a community. And again, spirituality, I say, that includes religion, but non-religious virtues and values and belief systems as well. So we're not trying to water that down by any stretch of the imagination, but it cannot eclipse the rights of others if you're going to be part of the society. And that's where I think we're really running up against it right now. So, to your question, Ryan, should religion be in politics or whatever? Religious people are in politics and they should be allowed to be religious people, period. What no one should be allowed to do is force everybody else to think and act like they do. And I don't care if you're right, left, or center. That's just not the way it works, right? You can fight for it. You can argue for it. That's what the whole structure and the system and the institutions are about. Make your case, get mad, stomp your feet, whatever. Don't lie. As we didn't get to misinformation and disinformation either, right? Because that's not sincere. I mean, just based on your own convictions, why would you do that, right? And don't coerce others, force others to do what you want them to do, unless it's what the law says, like not murdering other people or not lighting their homes on fire, stuff like that. Then yes, you can use the security implements of the state to stop them, right? But it's a challenge. Where does that identity, religious identity and religious ideology have its boundaries in a society that embraces freedom of worship?